Thank you for tuning in for this bonus episode of the Estee Show, where we are joined by the one and only David Lifson, Chief Product Officer of multiple companies, but he's about to embark on a very exciting journey. We had a very interesting conversation offline on the presidential debate. What are the lessons us, common folk in product management, can learn from the disaster that was last Thursday night? And we're bringing this conversation to you today. Dave, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.
The presidential debate happened last Thursday night, and the cyberspaces of the world have been blowing up ever since, analyzing what has happened, expressing surprise, expressing concern about the future. I think the perspective we had looking at this was unique because we're in a world where, yes, we're not as public as two presidential candidates who have each served a term and been extremely controversial, but we are in environments where there's a constant requirement to get buy-in from people around us, to deliver a message, to drive a vision. There were many things that can be learned from the debate, both on what to do and what not to do. Let's dive in on your overall impressions and the first lesson you want to start with.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this even more since the last time we talked about this. And, as product managers, when we talk about strategy, we talk about hypothesis-based thinking, and political strategy is built around hypotheses as well. And I don't know what the Biden campaign strategy is, but they asked for this debate and they asked for it to be earlier than presidential debates have ever been in the televised era. And presumably their hypothesis was, if people could just see the Biden that we see, it'll help his numbers. And if people could see the Trump that we see, it'll hurt Trump's numbers. And then this debate happens and the hypothesis proves false, right? And this is something that happens all the time with product managers. We have a hypothesis and we run a test or a survey or whatever, A/B test, and it proves false. And then the question becomes, well, was the problem the execution? Did we build the wrong solution, but we had the right strategy, or was the strategy itself wrong? And I feel like that's the debate that's happening right now. Did he have a bad 90 minutes, but otherwise he's fine? Or was he actually just not fine from the beginning?
Was the test not an MVP?
Right, and so this is the debate.
This is actually outside of the list. This is a new shtick from Dave. I love it. So you're saying when you're going out with a hypothesis, be ready for the hypothesis to be wrong. And I'm going to add a point to that is, what's your plan B? So often we put all of our eggs in that hypothesis basket, assuming it's going to prove true, and we don't plan the next chess move. If this hypothesis is wrong, then we should start exploring paths B, C, and D. And I think what's happening now is a clear example of not having thought about the next move. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, here's how we handle that gracefully.
Yeah, and the Biden campaign is clearly trying to make the argument that this was an error in tactical execution. It's not an error in sort of the underlying hypothesis. But then you've got a lot of other people who are starting to come out of the woodwork being like, I don't know, we've been kind of seeing this for a while now. It's been getting worse. Maybe he's not the best candidate to represent the Democratic Party. So, yeah, and in that case, what could the Biden campaign really have done? Other than they work for the guy,
But they could have not proposed a debate altogether. There was no primary debating on the Democratic side. Trump refused to show up to primary debates on the Republican side. Yeah. Frankly, I wasn't even expecting debates in this presidential election.
That's why it was such a surprise.
That part of history is over.
Yeah, the Biden campaign asked for this out of the blue.
And they set the conditions also.
Yeah. All Trump did was say yes.
Right. If they didn't have you'll have the 2 minutes and you'll have the full 2 minutes. One of the painful moments of the debates that kept on repeating was when Jake Tapper, Dana Bash would say, you still have 45 seconds left. And then it would be but he has nothing to say. And that was painful to watch. And if it was both microphones were on and Trump would be going in with his jabs and they would be screaming at each other, you wouldn't even see that they don't have content to fill that space.
It's true. And I will just say that the same thing was happening to Trump, where he would be answering his question. He would end early. And then Jake Tapper would be like, well, that wasn't the question I asked you, so I'm going to ask you the question again.
And you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, it's not great. There's one other thing I wanted to say, which I think does get to the list that we had discussed earlier, which is Biden was not, he was not prepared. And I've been in situations, or people on my team have been in situations where there's been a meeting on the books for a while. It's, in front of the executive team. Maybe it's quarterly planning or some big presentation or review. And if you're not ready, there's all of this pressure to just have the meeting anyway, because you're afraid that if you were to reschedule, there'd be so much damage. But I feel like people don't appreciate enough how much damage can happen if you do go through with the meeting and you flop. And so, like, I don't know anything about politics, but I do feel like the Biden campaign should have more seriously considered weighing the damage of rescheduling this debate by saying, listen, our guy's got a cold. He's just not, like, let's do it next week instead of this week. And it'd be a huge,
Make up some international
right? It'd be a
crisis.
huge mess. But
But this is a bigger mess.
this is going to potentially end his campaign.
So the message you have is, if you're not ready, reschedule. And I think this will also bring us to the third lesson, which is setting expectations. I think the expectation set from the Biden team was that Biden is going to be super sharp, super prepared. For 7 days, he was in Camp David preparing for this debate. And Trump actually changed his strategy on setting expectations in the 2 weeks preceding the debate. He spoke on the All In Pod where he was asked about how he feels about Biden. And the expectation was he'd be giving his spiels like he does in the rallies, like he's half dead, he doesn't know how to walk off the stage. And instead he was like, Biden, I saw him crush Paul Ryan. He could be a great debater. We'll see how it goes. And he made sure not to set the stage of he's going to be dead, because had he set the expectations that he'll be dead, as long as he didn't die on stage, it would have been a success. But because Trump tried not to set the expectations too low, and Biden's campaign said we're going to be really prepared because we're spending 7 days, the expectations were set even higher on Biden's side, and that's why the flop was so significant. So when you're setting expectations for a meeting, for a project, for a test, I think a big one is when you're running hypothesis, and you might be right and you might be wrong, but you're pretending and you're already acting as if the test ran and it was successful, and you expanded it to 100% of your audience, and you already generated all the revenue you would have generated. Yes, leaders have this idea of setting a vision and thinking big and getting people to buy into that vision. That being said, if the reality ends up being far from that vision or the opposite, the larger the vision, the larger the flop.
Yeah, and just on expectations, so I don't know if you happen to see that a couple days before the debate, Hillary Clinton had published an op-ed in the New York Times. And in that op-ed, she talked about expectations, and she said the expectations for both candidates at this point is super low. She's like, Biden basically just needs to prove that he's alive, and Trump basically needs to prove that he doesn't light himself on fire on stage. And I gotta say, and I've actually been really impressed with Biden as a president. I really agree with a lot of the things that he's done. He did not prove that he is alive. That's like a low bar, and somehow he missed it. And whereas, Trump came out, and to his credit, he didn't light himself on fire. And I think that if anyone actually sits down and tries to fact check anything that Trump said, it would be a disaster. But he didn't present himself as a raving lunatic, which is what people expected.
And Hillary, her pitch in that article was, I've debated both men, and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what to expect.
The only person ever. Yeah, it's true.
Another lesson for this. So she debated them in different years, all a long time ago, 2016, I think, 2008.
Might have been 08.
No.
I can't remember.
A long time
Yeah.
ago. And I think an interesting message, I think actually for both of the candidates, but is if you were the right person to do a job in a certain period of time, it doesn't mean you're the right person to do that job forever.
Mhm.
And in product management, in company leadership, very often the company leader that will get a company from point 0 to point 1 and will be able to get stuff off the ground and move really fast will not be the person who can ensure scalability and who can ensure a healthy culture and continuity. And there needs to be a switchover that happens. And in an ideal world, it's an amicable, I'm giving you the baby I've built so that you can raise it and take it to the next level. But it seems like human nature is a little bit different, and there's a lot of difficulty letting go of that power. And there's this belief like, no, I'm the one, I can keep this going.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this came from Kim. So my very first VP at Amazon, so my first job out of school was at Amazon, and my VP there, Kim Rockmiller, was the woman who created the product management position at Amazon back in like 1997 or whatever. And I'm pretty sure this quote came from her. So her dad was a 2-star general in the US military. And she told me once how even the greatest military generals are eventually relieved of duty. And it doesn't mean that you failed or you did a bad job, but at some point everyone is asked to step down. That's just sort of how it works. And it's definitely the case with founders as well. Just like you're saying, there's some founders who are great at those early stages, and then the company just gets too big for them. And, we can hope that the board at that point is strong enough to force the founder to step down if they can't see it themselves. But a lot of times they're not. And I think you're seeing that with Biden as well. He doesn't have a board of people around him who can force him to confront things he doesn't want to confront.
That's very interesting. In one of those World War II documentaries, there was a very clear juxtaposition between Churchill and Hitler, how Churchill was notorious for going out to the battlefields and switching out generals, saying, this battle's going on too long, we need a change, much more so than Hitler. And it's like this ability to replace, but this will bring us to the next point of surrounding yourself with people who will only say what you want to hear.
Yeah.
If you have a certain perception of reality and you want to keep going and you're opposed, or anytime you hear feedback that you perceive as negative, or I'll even say just feedback that doesn't reinforce your view of how the world should be going, instead of listening to that feedback, saying, how do we adjust our product to reality? You say, actually, I'll just get rid of this person who's bringing me this uncomfortable information, and then we can move forward in this world we've imagined.
I think product managers find themselves in this place a lot, where oftentimes we are the people bringing the data that the founder doesn't want to see, or
The quote unquote bad
the
news.
bad news, right? Or we talk to customers and we're like, sorry, like people don't want this thing that you forced us to build.
Just an example to your story, I was in a meeting where a CEO asked if we could shut down the customer feedback channel because it was just too much negative news and made people feel bad.
Well, yeah, and I don't know. You can stick your head in the sand as much as you want, but it doesn't change reality.
That lesson is, don't surround yourself with yes men, or be open.
So yes, don't surround yourself with yes men. And also, like, a similar thing is great leaders look for data that contradicts their intuition or their bias. And I think PMs, you know how for a long time people would always talk about how PMs are the CEO of their product. And I hate that phrase. And I feel like what it did was encourage a bunch of MBAs who wanted to be PMs because they felt like it would give them like unconstrained power to be in charge of some corner of a product. But the problem is it doesn't work that way. Like reality is actually in charge. User behavior is actually in charge. And it's our job just to try to fit those pieces together as best as possible. And so we can stomp our feet and insist that a product needs to be a certain way. But at the end of the day, the data is going to be the data.
So what was the data here that wasn't taken into account? I think the message that Biden needed to hear was, the way you think this debate is going to resonate with the voters is not the way it's going to resonate is not the way you think it's going to resonate.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is, look, going into that debate, if the polling averages are to be believed, and I know a lot of people are skeptical about polling in this era of cell phones and whatever, but I believe in the averages of polls.
People are also skeptical of polls because from 2016 all the way to present day, polls have been, I don't want to say wrong because statistically, there's a chance, blah, blah, they're not wrong, but the predictions have not been coming true.
Yeah,
From
and like
the 2016 night, 22, the red wave, which never happened, like all of these.
It didn't, and like, I mean, the challenges with the polls is they're trying to guess at you have to break down the voting population into all these different segments, and you have to guess at how big each segment is going to show up, right? And it is hard to guess. In this case, Biden was at best tied with Trump, but I would say probably a couple points behind, especially in the swing states or the battleground states. And so going into that debate, it wouldn't have been enough for him to just keep the status quo because he was behind. He needed to like beat expectations. And so his staff needed to convince him that that wasn't going to be likely. And so the question is, did they actually believe that it wasn't going to be likely, or are they on the same pie in the sky place that Biden is, where he actually thought that he could beat expectations on this? I don't know the answer. That is an example where the data, obviously there's a difference between the data and then the analysis. And I believe that they had all the data that they needed. And the question is, did they do the right analysis?
So I think what you're bringing up is interesting. There were essentially 3 outcomes, right? One outcome was that the debate wouldn't make too much of a difference one way or another.
Which is what usually happens
Uh,
with debates.
right. For the Republican primaries, no one budged pretty much from the polls where they were standing based on the debates, and there were multiple. The second outcome, and that's I think the outcome everyone was hoping for, that their position would come out stronger and they would be able to swing a portion of the independents in their favor. Right. And the third scenario was that it would be such a disaster that they would fall significantly below where they were standing before. And I think that's a scenario that they hadn't considered seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't. It reminds me of how, and this is sort of a question of like, how desperate were they feeling they were? Because startups will get into this place where,
they'll say we need to build something. Like they didn't need this debate.
Well, this is the question, right? Because like so startups, for example, like let's say that you've got, I don't know, 12 months of runway left. And you're missing your numbers, right? The founder now has to make a decision. Do we just stick with the plan, keep doing what we're doing, and try to like out execute, make up the lost ground? Or do we like pivot wildly and try something totally different and hope that it works? And I feel like the Biden camp right now is saying, no, everything's fine. Let's just keep grinding away. It'll work out. And then you've got a lot of other people being like, I don't know, man. I think we need to like throw the Hail Mary and like do something different.
Very interesting. Now this strategy is happening. But the thing is, if there was no debate last Thursday, if they hadn't taken that swing, then chances are the campaign would just be in a much better spot right now.
Well, better relative to the terrible place it's in now. But I would say had they done nothing, the status quo would have been they'd still be on track to lose by a little bit.
Okay, so this brings us to the next lesson, which is the right decisions have to be made at the right time. I heard a lot of people saying they're doing the debate earlier in June so that if something needs to be adjusted, it can still be adjusted. But not really, because we're a few months away from the election. That's still too late. The right time to say, hey, let's try something. If it doesn't go well, we'll shift, would have been before
a year ago.
Delegates would have been voting. Exactly. Very often, the example you're giving in a business with 12 months of runway, like 12 months of runway might not be enough time, even if you're taking the right swing and the right bet. And chances are it's the wrong bet. If it doesn't go according to the plan A, the best scenario, you're stuck. You're done. You're over. So I really think like having realistic goggles and saying our ideal scenario is A, but we have a solid plan B and C scenario, which really feels like that's missing here.
Yeah. Well, now again, let's imagine that we are a startup and we have 4 months of runway and we're on track to not raise another round. What do we do? And yeah, if you think you're really close and you just need like 5% more growth or like one more like good month of data, you might be able to convince the investors to give you a couple years more runway. Or you can be like, okay, we've got a dud on our hands. We've got 4 months left. Can we hack together a completely different prototype with the money we got left that can get people really excited to give us another shot? It's risky business.
So we're in risky business territory,
yeah.
Not where we have a healthy business and we're looking to grow X% year over year.
Yeah, and I just want to transition us to another point that's related to this, which is I feel like when Biden made the decision a year ago that he was going to run again, and by continuing to make that choice, at least up until now, I feel like he's made it more about himself and his ego than he's made it about the success of the country or, in our analogy, the company. And I think that a lot of PMs can do that, and a lot of founders definitely can do this, where they convince themselves that they are uniquely qualified and uniquely special in the ability to succeed here where no one else could.
Or even worse, rather than thinking about their uniquely positioned to succeed, they don't even think about succeeding. They just say, what about me? Where does that leave me?
Yeah, absolutely. As people who like work in tech, I think we come across that a lot when we're all getting to a meeting and we're, I don't know, debating a couple different ideas, or someone puts forward like, well, I think this is what we should do. And if the low ego thing to do in that situation is to say, it doesn't have to be my idea. I just want us to choose the best idea. So let's go follow the data and see where that leads us. And some people just not able to do that. They feel, I don't know, personally insulted or attacked or whatever it is, where they're like, no, like it's about my idea and I think I'm right. And that's really toxic.
One example here, I was in a meeting and we were discussing an idea, and basically it was like, we could implement this idea, but then it's going to seriously cannibalize and hurt another really important piece of the business. And the person who was responsible for the portion of the business that this idea would benefit said, well, that's not my area of the business, so I don't care.
Wow.
And there was like silence on the call.
Mhm.
It's like, you can't even explain to a person like that. Like, that's not the way we talk, but that's not the way we think. Like, we're on a ship, and if you're going to make a hole in your section of the ship, we're all going to sink.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, hey, the hole wasn't in my room, so we're all good.
So true. So in 2018, when I was at the Knot, I was one of, I can't remember, something like 4 or 5 VPs of product and, owning in different areas of the business. And we were in between CPOs. And so we were all sort of temporarily reporting into the CEO. And so I remember we were meeting with Mike, the CEO, and one of the other VPs was describing how he was thinking about his part of the business or his part of the product. And I just sat there silently because I didn't really know his part of the product and the business like he did. And I didn't entirely agree with what he was saying, but I was like, I don't know, I'm not the expert, so I'm just going to sort of stay quiet. And the CEO called me on it, and he was like, Dave, I think you have something to say here and you're not saying it. What's going on? And I gave him that reason. And he's like, no. He's like, we are all in charge of this thing. And so you need to start putting that hat on and realizing that we all have shared ownership here. It's not my problem versus your problem.
Very interesting. The parallel to the debate is by insisting that you're going to stay in the race because that might be the best thing for you personally, you might be hurting the party or the
Yeah, and
country at
there's this
large.
like, okay, this is a little bit conspiracy theory maybe, but like I kind of believe it that the people who are advising him are the ones who have the most to personally benefit by him continuing to be president. Is
Obviously. I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. It's their
it's their
jobs. That's how politics
it's their
work.
jobs. It's probably nice,
Candidate drops out,
to
you're
right, like be first lady or to have your grandfather, or in Hunter's case, like your dad, continue to be president. And so the fact that he's only consulting with the people who have that personal gain to be had is something I don't agree with.
that goes back to the point of don't surround yourself with yes men.
Right. Yeah.
Surround yourself with people who value the company and who want the company to succeed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the messaging
Yeah.
lesson. The goal of a president, or one of the important things of a president, to set a vision for a country. Like they talk about, some people can be great tactitioners, great policies, but they're not quote unquote presidential. People talk about JFK's speech of put a man on the moon in the next 10 years, setting that vision. And in product management, the CEO is obviously the first line of defense that has to set that big vision that people have to believe in. But the product leader also needs to have a vision that people can buy into and work towards.
Yeah, well, I think there's 3 parts to the job. There is the strategy piece. Do they like see all the pieces on the chessboard and they've got like a really great plan for how to sort of achieve whatever? There is the execution piece, which obviously in product is all about how are we going about building and achieving. And then maybe in politics, it might be more about how do we actually convince people to pass laws and what should the policies be and like all the sort of like nitty gritty details. And then there's a third piece, which is messaging, it's communication. And with PMs and with founders, a big part of our job is telling the story that we want to tell. And we're selling a vision or we're convincing people that we need to pivot, or of all the different things that we could do the next quarter, the reason why we're prioritizing these things is for this reason. And this is why you should believe in me and believe in this argument. And as president, Biden's strengths when it comes to the strategy and the tactics, I think, is allowed to sort of demonstrate itself. And he's allowed to also benefit from the team of people around him who are helping him with that execution. But as a candidate, his weakness as a messenger and as a communicator is kind of the only thing that matters. And so,
Mm.
because he's going to have some policies and he's like, I believe in this thing and that thing. And if you hire me, if you reelect me, you're going to get those things. Okay. But mostly campaigning is about persuasion and it's about influence. And he was awful at the debate when it came to communication and a message. I bet if you surveyed 100 people who watched the debate and you asked them what was Biden's number one message, that he wanted you to take away from that night, no one would have any idea, because it was like you couldn't get past the way in which he was talking to really understand what he was saying. Whereas if you asked people that same question about Trump, and I do not agree with Trump's policies on basically everything, but like his messaging was so good. It was like clearly
It was
it was
immigration.
clearly
It was only
immigration, and it
immigration.
was like unambiguous. It was he said that every single time, and I think he really outperformed Biden and people's expectations because of that.
Going into the debate, the Trump card, the strong card for Trump was immigration. The strong card for Biden was abortion. And both of those were weak cards for the opposite candidate. Biden took a point on abortion and switched it to speak about his weakest point, immigration. And Trump was like, okay, I'll take it. But I think the line that will go down in the history books was where Trump goes, I don't know what he said at the end of the sentence, and I don't think he did either. And
It's a low
yeah.
point. Yeah. And by
So
the way,
yeah.
that sentence ended with Biden saying, "And I beat Medicare," which is just nonsense. It was not. I
Yes.
as
You
as
beat it to
as
death.
a lifelong Democrat, it just hurt me inside. Yeah.
Also, I'm sorry, but humor. I don't know if product managers should have humor, but like the life of a product manager is hard. So being able to laugh, maybe even if not in the big meeting, but in a side meeting or with people who you trust is a good thing. But the point about not being understood, not making your message clear. So very often product managers need to be the good communicators. But then there are the other stakeholders who don't necessarily need to be great communicators. So I'm thinking of engineers, right? They need to be good at engineering, and very often they're not good communicators. But who are the best engineers? The ones who can break down complicated concepts that the people at the table won't understand and break it down into a language where the relevant pieces for them will be understood.
Yes.
And yeah.
There's so I feel like all of us have either written or received the status update email that has like 30 bullet points in it, and it just goes on and on and on. In my past companies, we would have the PMs send a status update email every 2 weeks. Like, here's everything we did.
That
Or
got it in a
sometimes like
company.
the
Yeah.
engineer, the VP of engineering would send out like an email every month that's like, here's all of the stories that we completed or whatever it is. And those emails are so long, right? And they're long because the author was trying to prove how much work was done. It was
Yeah.
an output message, which is exactly what I think Biden's answer to the first question on the economy was. It was just
Mm.
like he wanted to just say as many of the bullet points as he possibly could, because there was so much that he was proud of and wanted to get more credit for. Those types of company emails, those types of messages, like that's what junior people do. Senior people will know that what you really need is the TLDR at the top that frames the work in the context of the strategy, in the context of the challenges that we're trying to overcome right now, and gives people a one sentence headline of like, yep, things are going well. We're making some progress here. We learned this thing that we didn't know before, and we're responding to it in this way. I'm excited to give you another update in 2 weeks. And the rest of the email can still be all of that other stuff, but you can like rest assured that maybe only 5% of your audience actually cares about all those things, and everyone else, like, they just want to read the top TLDR and move on with their lives. And
Yeah.
yeah, and Biden had that opportunity with every single question of just saying like, here's the headline. I want to talk about democracy, I want to talk about abortion, I want to talk about whatever it is, the Chips Act or who knows what, and he blew it.
Lenny and his Atlassian episode, they acquired Loom, which I think is an interesting acquisition. But they said because we're a remote first company, and at the beginning of every document, they basically attach a Loom at the top, a video explaining the TLDR, what's in the document, what's
Yeah.
important. Okay. Any other big messages or lessons for product managers from this fascinating moment in history?
I've got one more, which is when I'm preparing for a presentation, I work backwards from what is the goal of my presentation, and then I craft what I present and how I present it so that it best helps me achieve that goal. And what I think a lot of people do instead is they work forwards from what is everything that I did that I need to tell you about. And that's how you get into these sort of like long-winded, exhaustive sort of like recounting of the history of all the things, and which I think is what the trap that Biden fell into. And so I would recommend for everyone, if you are giving a presentation, but particularly a high stakes one, think about who your audience is, of the different constituencies in your audience, what are the points of persuasion that you need to make? What are the things that you need? What are the ways in which you need to change their minds? And then only say those things, and only focus on making those points. And yeah, you might therefore not get credit for some stuff that you did that you are personally proud of. But the point of these meetings isn't to show off all your trophies. The point of the meeting is to like move the ball forward on your strategic goals. And I think that's something that every PM needs to remember, but also something that Biden clearly forgot.
Dave, this has been amazing. Absolutely loved it. The fact that we're thinking of the world in terms of seeing presidential candidates and be like, oh, totally saw that at work, just shows what an interesting industry we are, but also how there's really something applicable for us in everyday life that we can pick up on and learn from.
Yeah, at
David,
the end of the day, there are some problems that are technology problems, and then there's a lot of problems that are just people problems. And it's a lot of the same skills. So I'm glad we got to talk about it today.
To reframe it in corporate speak, it's people opportunities.
It sure is.
Bye,
Thank
Dave.
you.